What's going on, everybody, and welcome into the 107th episode of the Crazy One podcast. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Gates, and this is the show where we talk about creativity, leadership, design, and everything else that helps to empower creative people. Now, remember, you can listen to all the shows, get the show notes, and a whole lot more. All you have to do is just head over to thecrazy1.com. It's thecrazy and the number 1.com. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you're sure you get the latest episodes whenever those come out. And do me a favor, it's the only payment I ever ask for. Leave a review while you're there. Let people know what you think about the show. It helps it reach more people. And then again, we all get smarter for it. Also, The Crazy One is now on YouTube, so you can go over there and check out a whole nother set of original content around career coaching, tutorials, masterclasses, see some of my old keynotes, and a bunch of stuff like that. Again, just head over to thecrazy1.com/YouTube. And as always, look, I love to make this a conversation. So as we talk about this stuff, you have any questions, any feedback, things like that, or you just want to keep up with my various strange, adventures and thoughts, you can always follow me on Twitter or Instagram, and follow the show on LinkedIn or Facebook. Well, with all that usual upfront aside, look, I think we can all definitely admit that we are living in some pretty unprecedented times. And I think there's definitely too many of us have been forced into finding a new job, either through layoffs and furloughs, or honestly, because I think we've just seen that our companies, I think, just really aren't equipped to be successful, that the leadership and that a lot of what we're doing and working remote has exposed a lot of those problems. And so as a result, we're looking around to see maybe what our other options are. Now, I think for a lot of us, as we set out on that journey and we set out on that search, we quickly slam into this massive, massive wall of frustration, of confusion, depression that I think that comes with searching from a new job. And this is a conversation I've been having with so many people lately who have been reaching out, who have applied to 10, 20, 40, 50, 100 jobs and just aren't getting the results that they wanted. And I think, look, this isn't anything new. But I think the combination of that job hunt with everything else that's going around us really seems to be putting a much finer point on the problem than I think anything that I've ever really seen before. For example, I recently heard from a designer, and she had applied to 130 jobs and only got 3 interviews. I know her work. I know what she does. She is a great, great designer. And I think whenever you see numbers and ratios like that, and that's why I said this is not a new problem, but it definitely puts a finer focus on it. And look, this is something else too that, it's always interesting to me because this is something that I'm not immune to either. I'm going through the same things as everybody else. People tell me all the time, right? Like, oh, you could work for any company you wanted to. You want to bet? I feel like for some reason in my career, it's like Goldilocks almost, where I went from not knowing enough. I never knew enough. I never had enough experience. I never had, there's always something that wasn't enough. To now with too many of them, I know too much. Or I don't know, maybe it's because I do all this and I'm too public and this isn't what they want to sign up for. But, look, I can't tell you over the years how many jobs I've applied to that you never hear back from, where you get the form letter that says you're not the right candidate and all that stuff. So this is something that none of us are immune to. But I think the other thing is usually whenever I think about any sort of problem like this, I think I also want to make it clear that I think that both sides are the problem here. This isn't just something that is just on the system side or recruiter side or something like that. That I think it really is that not only does the system have some issues, but I think we also have to take some accountability for our issues in this, that we continue to engage in this broken system, somehow expecting different results. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to look at and really sort of examine what are all of the different various and sundry problems that come up during a job hunt, and look at, I think, maybe how can we use some different thinking and some different approaches to short circuit some of these problems and maybe get some different or better results. But let's start with the problem. And I think whenever we start to sort of walk through this gauntlet of problems that we all face in this process, I think that honestly, probably the main problem is that there isn't just one problem. That depending on a lot of different factors, that yes, it can be the process and different things like that, but also for the fact that even in that process, there are multiple points of failure and stress in each step. Problems with the system, problems that could be with us, And that in many cases, that's why it's not a simple do these two things and you will find success sort of a proposition. That in many cases it is, I think looking at a number of these different factors, trying to get some outside perspective to figure out which one of these applies to me. But the other thing I want to be able to do with this is to break this into identifying what do I think are the systemic problems, and then what do I think are, I guess, the you problems, the problems that I see for the people who are applying for those jobs. And let's start with one of those you problems, because I think it all starts in how we start the process. Because in many cases, what we do is we go to job sites or we set up job alerts or we do these sort of things. And in many cases, we just go out and start applying to anything that almost has a pulse, right? Like anything we think could be close to something that we might like. And I think it's this sort of like, I'll take anything approach that, look, on the one hand, it's understandable. Because whenever you're under that pressure to find a job, to be able to get money coming back in, I think it's an understandable mentality for sure. But I think it's something, whenever we step back and take a look at it, that in many cases, I think it helps alleviate an anxiety, but I don't know that it makes a whole lot of sense, because what you're doing is you're setting yourself up for so much rejection. We know the way this process goes. We know how this stuff works. So we're setting ourselves up for all this rejection and stress, since we're applying to jobs that, we probably aren't the best fit for. So I think that there's that part of it, is that as we sort of don't have either that sense of clarity or that sense of belief of who we are, or again, we'll talk about this in a minute, we'll talk about it next. Let's just talk about that next, like job descriptions. Job descriptions are, I think, the other part of this that, you read these job descriptions and it's just so insane, right? I don't know another way to be able to describe that, because companies ask for this insane amount of experience or these insane requirements, and we think these are the standards that we have to live up to for these roles. Whenever I think most of the time the reality is that what happens is that, I don't know what, a recruiter, a head of design, somebody who's going to be the hiring manager, somebody goes into LinkedIn and these sites with whatever the title is. They type that in, they search whatever that is, and then they sort of put together this Frankenstein of different things that they've read in different places to be able to put that together and sort of feel like, okay, well, that probably is about right. And this is, I think, one, the problem, because it makes it almost impossible for us to actually understand what's going on with the job. But I think the other thing is that, in many cases, they don't know what they want. And I think this came into very, very sharp focus whenever recently I put a post on LinkedIn about what was honestly, I felt like a comical job description. And what it was that it was they in particular were looking for a design role, and I think it was a junior role that wanted 5 years experience, which I don't never will understand that. But they also wanted at least 5 years experience in Figma or Adobe XD. Okay, so on the surface, you just sort of read that and think, okay, I don't measure up. The hysterical part for me with that is that XD and Figma have only been around for 3 years. So unless you own a damn time machine, there is no way that you're going to be able to live up to and work with that sort of job description. Like, it's just insane. And again, I get these all the time for leadership roles when people tell me, oh, I need to have a bachelor's degree and 20 years experience. Okay, I can tell you, I have neither of those in that particular field. And as a matter of fact, for that particular industry that they were looking for, no other head of design at any of the other major companies in that industry had it either. But they are just so confident and so sure that this is what it is they need. But obviously, the resonance around how broken job descriptions are was very, very clear in the reaction to that post. Because I think as of this week, it had about 750,000 views. It had over 12,000 likes and over 700 comments. Clearly, it struck a nerve. And so instead of, companies going through and actually putting in the due diligence, thinking about what really needs to go into this role, thinking about what is going to make this role successful, putting things like KPIs and that sort of information in job descriptions, again, we're just sort of willy-nilly welding these together, thinking we're going to kick the can down the road, and whenever somebody starts, then we'll figure out what the job actually is. We're not taking the time to understand the damage and understand the toll that that's taking. So I think that interface of job descriptions, for me, is causing more imposter syndrome. It is causing more anxiety. It's causing more of these things than I think I've seen in a really long time. But obviously with COVID, there's also been a change. Companies aren't working the same way. In many cases, they don't have the same amount of money for recruiting and other things like that they often did before. And so what I think you find is a much greater pressure on internal recruiters to figure out how to identify creative talent. And this is a systemic problem. Much like the job descriptions, these are really problems with the system because and look, I think that in many cases, I get an overly bad rap for putting the blame on recruiters, which I don't think is the case. I think it is a systemic problem that recruiters honestly are usually the face of. That they aren't either taught the right way, they're not invested in, that they're not partnering with the right people to be able to help them give that sort of a thing. But it is a system that puts them in a position where they need to judge the quality of a creative mind through a process that often does not have systems in place to figure out how to value those. So instead, we turn to things like keywords, or we turn to these other things that aren't really the right measure or metric to identify good talent. So I think in too many cases, that talent gets lost. I can't tell you, on more than one occasion, I've applied for a job, didn't hear back, or was rejected. At some point down the road, ran into somebody from that company, a leader or somebody else, who was like, oh, we had this great role you'd have been perfect for. To which my response was, I know, that's why I applied for it. And you said I wasn't the right fit. And they're like, oh, we had no idea. We never saw. But again, there's definitely these sort of issues. I think one of the other biggest systemic problems is that often we just don't know why we're getting the results that we get. We're not getting any feedback. I would say best case scenario, you get a form letter that says you don't have the right qualifications, but in most cases, you get no feedback at all. If you're not the candidate, and again, I think this happens at all parts of it, where we just simply, aren't, it's like, well, what's going on here? How do I improve? What do I do? There's no sort of sense of, okay, this is some actual feedback. And I don't know if sometimes that's just a disguise that, again, they aren't really investing the time they should to look at this. I don't know if it's a disguise that they don't know. I don't know what it is, but I think that's one of the biggest problems. And especially for us, that silence, that rejection, especially at such a moment of vulnerability, where we are going out there and just, looking for acceptance and understanding, really comes at the worst possible moment because you are so vulnerable. And then to get that level of rejection, I don't know what, it just hits home harder than it normally would. And that's why I said, I think because it is such a more vulnerable and sort of raw position. But I think that, this is where it really, because of that, then turns into, it's hitting us at the worst possible moment in such a personal way that, again, it starts to really feed either a sense of hopelessness, a sense of imposter syndrome, and a lot of those sort of things. But, I think that those tend to be really the systemic problems. But like I said before, and we talked about this a little bit about, what are the you problems with that spray and pray approach. But, and this is, again, where it becomes so hard because it's hard to figure out where is the problem. Is the problem with the system? Is the problem with me? Is it with both? But the other trend that I see, and again, this is sort of the tough love approach that I always try to give, is that in many cases, I just see a lot of times where people aren't putting in the work. That they're not getting the results because they're not putting in the work. More than a few times recently, I've heard from people who have applied to countless jobs. They worked for teams who put out a bad product, or they had a toxic culture, or inept leadership, and a lot of reasons why their work wasn't in a good place. I think that the problem often is, and this again is where that tough love needs to come in. It's a rare moment when I do it in this way, but it's almost like they're becoming comforted by that excuse that, they have a reason why the work isn't better. They can blame someone else. This is not a new theme on this show. But the problem is that whenever they do that, the fact that they're surrounded by those things that are not really sort of giving them what it is they need, they let it over permeate, and they let it really become an excuse where the level of effort that they're putting in at work, or the way they feel because of where they work, extends into their site, their resume, their LinkedIn, their brand, whatever it is. And as I told somebody recently, just because you work for a company that has a 2-star app does not keep you from having a 5-star brand or a 5-star portfolio, because those are the moments where you can prove to everyone through this work that you are ready for something better, for something greater, that all you're missing is the opportunity, and you've been put in a series of bad situations that have prevented you from doing this work. Because there is a hard reality at the end of this, that I think sometimes we take our view of our situation, of our brand, of those sort of things, and we're missing the bigger picture that's going on here, where it's like, look, at the end of the day, the way I have always thought about this is the Hunger Games. You are not going to get great results with minimum effort. This is something where if there is somebody who is out there who is trying to outwork you, who is trying to out-hustle you, who is trying to put in more work to get faster and better than you are, those are the people that will win. Again, I don't talk about things about how work ethic beats talent for no reason. But I think in many cases, that's what we in this process do need to take a look at, is what is our commitment? What is our work ethic? Are we doing everything we can do to get the results that we need? And I think that is often what this comes down to, is it is a moment of incredible insecurity, but it is also a moment that asks for belief and some amount of risk in who you are. And I think that in many cases, we don't take the risks, or we don't believe in ourselves as we go through this process. I think this is why I've been doing episodes about why, again, it is so evident that nobody negotiates their salary, because we're just sort of thankful to be able to get the job. Nobody, again, not enough people are building their brand because they just want to take whatever the industry can give them. And, look, these are these times where, whenever we do that, we are our own worst enemy. We're our worst enemy to grow our career, to make more money, to get more opportunity. It's like, look, we're afraid to apply for a job because it might be more senior, or we don't think we have the job title. Like, there's always an excuse why it's not going to be right. Mostly because the job descriptions are insane, and there usually isn't a person that is totally right. But I think that that's also a big part of this. And I think especially this becomes an issue as we look at other segments who I think we're trying to empower. As in many cases, as we look at some minority candidates and a large portion of female candidates, like there are studies that have different numbers, but generally 90% of men will apply for a job they don't think they're quite qualified for. On average, only about 40% of women will. And I think it's this internal narrative of like, oh, well, it's not right, or I'm not sure I'm ready. Those sort of things really become an issue in terms of, again, how do we push ourselves forward, or at least try? But ultimately, I think the result of all of this is that this process, I think honestly for everybody, can just be incredibly demoralizing. We are putting our whole life, all of our decisions, our jobs, and everything else in front of the world, asking for validation, acceptance, and praise. All of this adds up, and it takes a toll. And there are so many points along this process where things can fall apart. You can have a great first date, great introduction. Then you find out, well, the compensation is way off. You can have a great second talk, but then to be able to find out that the boss or the team isn't really doing the right work, or the job description is wrong. And with each rejection, which each role you applied for and got no response, with each interview process that you go through where you went through and they went with somebody else instead, the stress grows and it deepens. And in all of this creates a very palpable problem. I think it is something that we carry with us through our careers. We carry with us into our next position. So, great. We know what the problems are. And I think that in many cases, the reason why I wanted to go through those was just so you know that you're not alone in what it is that you are probably feeling or going through. Because I think in so many cases, it's what am I doing wrong? What's going on? And again, I think any one of those things could be the issue. But let's turn the page on that, because we know the system is broken. We know it is riddled with problems, and it has been for a long time. So my question is to all of you, why do we keep doing the same things and expecting different results? We keep engaging in a system that we know is going to produce these results, that we know is going to make us feel this way. And I think that is probably the biggest problem, is that we know these problems, but we keep expecting different results. We need to take a different approach that gives us a better chance of breaking through and getting better results, because this is a design problem. Again, if what we're doing isn't working, we need to try some different things. So what I want to sort of tell you or be able to explain are either some of the things that I've done, some of the things that I've seen other people do, things that I've talked about on this show that maybe you didn't listen to quite in the right way, but actually will pay off results, to be able to talk about that. But I think that, look, this all starts with, and there is this inescapable part, that before anything, you need to make sure that you take the time to build and understand your brand. I endlessly talk about this for a reason, because for me, there is no escaping it. If you want to know who you are, what you're good at, why you're different, you have to be able to do that, because if not, you're going to struggle in your current role. You're going to struggle in trying to find a new role. And again, this is something that can happen at any level of seniority. I know a lot of people will say, look, I'm young in my career. I don't know what those things are. You are good at something. You are good at a lot of those sort of things. And I think, look, on this one, I'm just going to refer back to episode 106 for more about this. But I think, this is an inescapable part of the process, which I think then goes hand in hand on to what I'd said before. You need to put in the work on your portfolio, your resume, your LinkedIn, your social media. Tell your story. Tell us what sets you apart. If you want a more senior position, then use your portfolio to show people that. Sweat every detail, because the problem is when we're doing this, we are looking at little things and using them as indicators for much bigger things, which is often incredibly unfair. But if a site has broken images, if it has broken links, if it doesn't work in mobile, if there's any litany of these sort of things, then we're going like, ugh. Yeah, I'm not really sure this person is thinking through the details. I'm not really sure that they're going through and really understanding what this process is and what is that going to mean to be able to work with them. But we're going to assume for this that you've done that. You've done the work on your brand, you put in the hard work on your portfolio and all those other things, or whatever it is that you want to use to be able to represent yourself. Now what? So in many cases, I said to you, we had this problem where we're doing this carpet bombing. We're just doing this sort of thing where all that we're doing is we're just applying to all these jobs that are out there, which means that everybody else who you're competing with probably has the exact same setup of the exact same searches, seeing the exact same jobs, and you're just putting yourself into this massive stack of resumes. Here again, we need to rethink the system. We need to short circuit that. So for me, instead of doing that, or again, just continue to do it, but maybe in addition to that, what I want you to be able to do is to think about, why don't you start reaching out to those teams, to those leaders, to those hiring managers, or whatever it is. Find that company you want to work for. Find that team that you're interested in and reach out to them with a sincere interest and a sincere demonstration of this sort of insight that you have. Because I think for me, it sets you apart and makes you much more than just a resume. If I'm just going through a stack of generic resumes, and then I get this email from somebody who says, hey, look, I'd love to have a conversation about what does it take to join your team, even if you don't have an open role. I'd love to be able to be a part of what you're doing. This is what it is that you do that I'm really passionate about or impressed about or whatever that is. That gets my attention in a very, very different way. And again, I think you can also use it to play either a short game or a long game. If there's an open role, say, hey, look, I'd love to be able to be considered for it, but here's why. Whenever I just get emails that people are like, oh, can you work at this company? Can you recommend me for this role? Or, hey, I'd be interested in this role and here's my resume. Okay, it's a wasted motion, because at that point you haven't given me a reason to believe or a reason to pay attention. Like, no, I'm not going to blindly recommend somebody I don't know for a job in my company, because that's my reputation at stake. And if all you're doing is just trying to get your resume in front of me for a different reason, yes, I read the email, but you didn't give me a reason to actually open any of it. Tell me, what is it that you want? How is it that we want to do that? Even if it's just like, look, even if I'm not right, can I get half an hour, because I'd love to be able to get some amount of feedback, to be able to get something to understand. What do I need to be able to work on? Because for me, in many cases, leaders think about how they hire sort of like a sports franchise. Even if I don't have a role that's right now, maybe even if you're a little bit too junior, having that pipeline can be incredibly important. And so again, I think it's one of those things where that ability to be able to do that can be powerful and often overlooked. And like I said, it short circuits just that let's dump my resume in the pile with everybody else. But I think there's also then that continuation of take the time to build your network. And I've said this in the past, but what we want to prioritize is real relationships, real outreach, real conversations. Connections are basically meaningless. Congratulations, you have 5,000 connections on LinkedIn. Who cares? If you need to reach out to somebody, if you need to get advice, I mean, you just have these things like they're trading cards. Because I think, in many cases, probably the most valuable thing you can have when you're hunting for a new job is that network, is that ability to talk to somebody, to be on somebody's mind, to get recommended for somebody. Hey, did you think about so-and-so? I know they're looking to do whatever that is. Again, this is a big part of why in the building of the Amazing Design People List. And if you haven't checked that out and you're going through this process, please go through. It's the Amazing Design People List, because one of the biggest things we added into that was a mentor section, which means we are trying to fix this fundamentally broken part of the system so that you can actually go in, and there's so many mentors from so many amazing companies where you can go in, and there's a little Calendly link where you can go in and book time with them to get that missing feedback, to build that network, to do these things that are so hard for us to be able to do. But I think the other part of it is to, if you have friends, if you have a network, use them. And if, again, there's a company or somebody that you want to be able to work for, and you know that your friend or somebody you used to work with knows that person or works with them or does something like that, well, then what you want to be able to do is to take advantage of that. And what I want you to be able to do in that moment is to ask for an introduction. What I don't want you to be able to do is to say, oh, here's my resume, can you pass it over to them? Or, oh, here's this sort of thing, can you do all the work for me? Because there again, you're not building a relationship. Well, it's an understandable mistake, and you may think that it's like, oh, somehow I'm being more anointed or validated or something. I want to build my network. So what I want to do there is I want an introduction where they can create the conversation, but then I can take it from there so that I can ask for what that is. I can ask for that introduction, that they've built the bridge and given context to why should this person talk to me. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to ask that. I want to be able to have that relationship. I want to be able to have that conversation, because when the other person does it, then I'm blind to all of that. And candidly, look, I know a lot of very nice people, but in some ways, I guess I'm either a little insecure or OCD or something, that I want to make sure the talk actually happened. And it happened in the way that I wanted it to, with the ask that I wanted it to. And it wasn't just sort of like, hey, are you hiring for somebody? And the other person goes, no. And you're like, oh, okay. And then you go back to the person who asked you. It's like, yeah, no, they're not interested. Well, that's not what the ask was at all. So again, I think that ability to do that and to leverage your network to do that can be really good. I think the other part of it is, and I think these are all very active ways of doing it, right? Like whenever you're applying, when you're doing outreach, that is an active way of going out and trying to find that job. I think there's also a good idea to combine that with maybe a little bit more passive approach. And by passive, what I mean is there are things like you be more visible and more vocal on social media. That, like I said, this is maybe a little bit more passive, but it can be just as effective. If you put your thoughts and your expertise out there, then I think that it really can help attract teams and different people to you, because the reality is we all have something of value to share. And I think that what may seem obvious to you may really or impress somebody else. And I think that that's often the part of it, is that we feel like it's obvious, or we feel like we're bragging, or that it's egotistical. I had a great story, actually just yesterday, from somebody, and again, I'll just say Jeremy's his name. I'll stop there. But I think that, one of the things that he had taken away from listening to the show was to invest in his brand, was to be able to go through and to put his thoughts out there more. And I think will openly admit that he wasn't sure about it, felt incredibly insecure about it, wasn't sure if this was the right thing to be able to do. Well, the reason why he wrote me yesterday was because after a fairly decent search, finally landed one of his dream jobs. And because what happened was Jeremy went out and started to write articles about different things that he thought about different opinions, about different insights, trying to share it and help other people. Well, one of the UX managers at the company that was always one of his dream jobs saw one of those articles and happened to send it to another UX director at the same company and said, hey, look, I think this person might be really great for the job that you have open. That UX director reached out, interviews ensued, dream job, is now starting. But it is one of those things where this really does work. But I think if you do it, and again, you have to invest in it. If you do it just to do it. I see so many people, whenever I go to their portfolio, they have like 2 blog posts from 3 years ago where they wrote 2 things, and because it didn't immediately, make all their dreams come true, they stopped. But this really does work. And being able to, if you're going to go out and share those things, it can really help get people to come back and to give you that information. But as we talked about how this process can be demoralizing, how we talked about it takes a toll, I think the other part of this is to make sure that you are mindful and taking care of your mental health. And I would say, honestly, just your overall attitude. Because here again, a very, very specific story from the last few weeks. I've been coaching a really, really great designer who had all the skills, all the experience to be able to get a really great job. But the reality was that her headspace just wasn't good. I think she had come out of a very toxic company, had applied to a ton of jobs, and just wasn't getting anywhere, and sort of emailed me in desperation of saying, look, I've gone through this whole process. This isn't working. I don't know if I should just go do something different. And I had said, look, why don't we just grab a little bit of time to talk, because this doesn't feel like this is an email conversation. And I think, that was what I saw, was that all of this had resulted in her being in this very dark, honestly, almost like self-defeating headspace, where she was going into every situation waiting for the negative, waiting to see how it was going to go wrong. And at one point I even said, it's sort of like if you go into a new relationship, just assuming at some point the other person is going to hurt you. You don't show up as yourself. You don't show up as somebody you're like, yeah, that's somebody I'd love to be able to be with. And I think that was really what we started to do, was just to try to reframe. It wasn't, look, you need all new skills. It wasn't any of those things. It was just working on her mindset. And I think, within a few weeks, the thing that was, again, so great was to see that just by the shift in attitude, of going in with a little bit of self-belief, of going in of a bit of an understanding, of going in with, again, more of an open mindset, within just a few weeks, and last time I talked to her, within 48 hours, she'd had 4 job offers. And it suddenly had the inverse of that problem of like, okay, now I have all these jobs and all these options. She had everything she needed, except belief in herself and a good headspace. And that's the other part of it, why I said this is so complicated, because you can have all the parts, but if you let the process win, and if you let it take that toll, then you become a self-fulfilling prophecy where that negativity really starts to show up, and you show up already sort of frustrated and defeated for the next person who did not do any of that to you, who may be that next dream job, but again, your headspace is getting in that way. But I think a lot of this is also just comes down to the fact that if what you are doing isn't working, take the time to reflect, refine, and evolve. Don't just keep trying the same things over and over again. Do what, again, people like Jeremy, or again, the woman I was talking about is that designer, go out and get feedback. Get another opinion. Reach out to people. Question everything. Try different things. Keep working. Because in many cases, that's why I said, maybe it is the system's broken and you have what you need. Maybe you do have what you need and the mentality is bad. Maybe you don't have what you need and you haven't, really been putting in the work, and you feel like you're telling a great story. But at the end of the day, it's just not coming across. But that's the other part of it, and I think in making this interactive and not internalizing this. And that's why I said, that's why I wanted to spend, what did we do? Probably half of the show just talking about problems, because I think we need to understand that we are not alone in what's going on here. But I think so often whenever I do coach people and talk with these different creatives about these issues, I find myself many cases coming back to one piece of advice. It's one that even I have to remind myself of more than every once in a while. I've said it on this show before, but I think that it bears repeating. Is that as we go through this process, if you want to outsmart it, if we want to do these sort of things, it is about how do we take more control? How do we say, if this isn't working, I need to do something different, take a different approach? But in most cases, we also need to realize as we go through this process, hope is not a strategy. Because too much of our search, too much of our career is based in hope. We hope recruiters will like our resume. We hope somebody will notice us. We hope that they will take the time to get to know who we are. They hope they're going to read everything on our portfolio, and on and on and on. And I think in many cases, whenever I do talk to people, that's the thing I point out is how often are they using that word? Well, I'm going to apply and I hope, that they see what this is. Or, I'm going to send this email out and I'm going to hope. It's important because, like I said, we have to take some measure of control. And we have to take more responsibility for what's going on. For me, it has always been about sustained success across the arc of my career. In many cases, I think it's not that hard to find a 15 minutes of fame, to design something to get some amount of notoriety, to do a talk at a big conference, to win some important award. But for me, it is much more about that, whenever that happens, I'm not hoping it's going to happen again. That for me, year after year, job after job, you have to make sure that your career is led by thought, work, action, and not hope. Because look, hope is easier, undoubtedly, right? Hope is a lot less work. Hope is just something where it's like you can tell yourself this great narrative about what's going to happen. But again, I will often come back to, hope are outcomes that are possible, but in many cases are not probable. And that it is about how do you really set about trying these different things, not just simply accepting things as they are. And to try, and again, no matter what your level of seniority is, to try this and more to be able to sort of short circuit that system. And that's the other part. Like, look, I would love to hear from people. If you've got some great story, if you've got some great thing that you've tried that's worked really well, do me the favor. Like, again, if you go on LinkedIn, I'll have this post on there, comment on there, write an article about it, send it to me. Do something to share this story about what are you doing that is differently and get it out there. I'll be happy to promote it. I'll be happy to do those sort of things, but we need to encourage this fact of where, again, we're just willing to be scrappier about how we do this and not accept these limitations that keep creating such destructive results for too many of us. So hopefully, as always, you found that useful. I'll have all the show notes and all this sort of stuff. You can just, again, head over to thecrazy1.com, go to episodes, all episodes, or this one if you're listening to it whenever it comes out. You can scroll down. It'll just be on the homepage. You can get a link there. Just head over to thecrazy1.com. It's thecrazy and the number 1.com. As always, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a review. Go over and check out the YouTube channel. Maybe you just want to do something a little bit different. You can go over and see that. As always, everybody down in legal wants me to remind you that all the views here are just my own. They don't represent any of my current or former employees. And always, I say it every time because I mean it every time, but thank you for your time. I know that time is truly the only luxury any of us have. It's incredible you want to spend any of it listening to me. But hey, look, until next time, go out and take that real look. Go to sites like that Amazing Design People list. Find some mentors. Find some feedback. Find ways of short-circuiting that system. Don't just keep slamming your head into the wall and expecting different results or thinking that somehow this system is going to magically change and make it easier for you. Look, I wish it would. For me and for so many other people, I wish it would. But look, I think that as always, what this is going to require us to do, stay crazy.